Hi there and welcome. This is Jenna from McGuire. I often like to grab a bunch of stamps that I've been wanting to use and sit down and make a bunch of cards at once. What I usually do is pick one technique and use them on all of the cards because it makes it go faster and I just seem to kind of get in a rhythm. That's what I did today. I decided to take a bunch of stamps and coordinating dies and make stamped shaker cards. Now I know shaker cards have been done in videos many times, but I kind of have a fresh spin on it today, where the card's focus is the stamped image and the shaker part is just kind of an embellishment. I have lots of tips and tricks for you along the way, along with many examples. And the best part is this technique works with so many different stamps and coordinating dies. So hopefully you have something on hand already that you can use. Okay, let's start with this example first. It's pretty simple, and then we'll do some more stepped up examples along the way. I am super excited about this card because it features a new stamp set from Paper Smooches called So Very Cute. The reason I'm excited is Paper Smooches has always been a favorite company of mine, and they had actually taken some time off from coming out with new products. And this is their first release and they're back at it. So each month they'll have new designs. So I stamped that adorable fairy from the stamp set and colored it in and also added some gold pen and some shimmer to it just so it has lots of sparkle. This was one of those cases where I stamped a bunch of things and took my markers with me, and Lila and I spent an afternoon coloring together. So then I came back and turned them all into cards. On the right, I have a piece of white cardstock that's slightly smaller than our final note card. So this is cut to 4 inches by 5 1/4. I've got my coordinating die and I'm positioning it onto that white cardstock. And then I'm going to run it through my die cut machine. You could use any die cut machine here. Okay, now that we have our front panel ready, it's time to create some dimension behind that so we can do a shaker window. I like to use white craft foam for this. It has nice dimension, it's inexpensive, and it die cuts easily. But before I die cut it, I'm putting Stick-It double-sided adhesive on both sides of the craft foam in the area in which we will die cut. I like using this double-sided adhesive because it's super thin, so I will actually be able to die cut through the 2 layers of adhesive and the craft foam with no problem. Now I need to know where to die cut here. This is going to go right behind that panel that we just die cut a moment ago. So what I'm going to do is position this right behind our white panel. So I'll flip it over and make sure it's centered. You can see the craft foam is slightly smaller than the white panel. I'm going to hold it there and put little marks on the edge of the die cut window. That way, when I remove this white panel, I can take my die and line it up with those little marks and run that through my die cut machine. I tested this out with different machines that I have, and all the machines were able to cut through these layers. By the way, there is craft foam out there that already has adhesive on it. I don't like that as much because the adhesive is thicker, so it doesn't die cut as well. I find that using Stick-It double-sided adhesive gives better results. Okay, so now the leftover piece is this die cut shape here. That's craft foam with the double-sided adhesive on both sides. I'm not going to use this today, but I'm going to save it because I can use this behind another of the fairy image die cuts for another card. So keep that in mind. You don't want that to go to waste. Okay, we're going to use the negative space for today. And by the way, you may have noticed I stamped "Thanks very much" onto the white panel there up at the top of the screen. And I have all of my pieces ready to assemble the shaker card. I found this is the easiest way to do this. I removed the release paper from the back of my craft foam, and I'm lining it up around my stamped image. So you can see that the image shows through that craft foam perfectly, and we're going to create a shaker window perfectly designed for this stamped image. Okay, next what I like to do is take my bone folder and really press that in place. Stick-It double-sided adhesive sticks best when you press it down. Next, I like to take an anti-static powder bag, kind of rub it along the inside edge, just in case any of that adhesive is exposed. That way, when we put our confetti in, it doesn't stick to that adhesive. For this first example, I'm using Tonic Nouveau confetti. And you don't want to use a lot here. If you use too much, you end up covering too much of your image up. You just want this to be an embellishment, not the focal point. We want the focal point to be on that stamped image. So I put a little bit of the clear in, and then just very few of the silver stars. Made sure that stayed on top of the image, inside of the die cut area. I'm carefully removing the release paper. And now I have a piece of acetate ready. I like to use Hero Art's acetate. They sell note cards, and I cut it down. The reason I use their acetate is it's perfectly clear and it's thick, but you could definitely use any recycled packaging that's clear. That would work fine too. I press that onto the exposed adhesive, making sure that all my little confetti stays in the center. Then I'll take my bone folder and press that down so that the stick-it adhesive holds onto the acetate. Now our last thing to add on here is our die cut panel that we created for the front. Now you could use many different ways of adhering this, and I'll show you some other examples throughout this video. This time I used double-sided tape from Be Creative, and I put it around that die cut opening on the back. Then around the outside edges of the craft foam, I'm using some Gina K Connect glue. That's so fast to apply and takes a lot less time than the double-sided tape, and it works great with the craft foam. Okay, so now I can position this right over it, lining up that white die cut panel with the craft foam panel below. The last thing we have to do is to add this to a card, and I decided to use this Sunny Studio pastel gingham paper on the background of our note card. So a little bit of this pattern paper shows around the edge. I thought that was a fun way to add a little bit of interest to this simple card, but not be too distracting. So I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card, and I'm covering the front with the pink pattern paper. Then I will put glue on the back of our shaker panel and add that right to the center. This card took very little bit of time to make. It was pretty quick to pull together, and you can see how just a little bit of sparkle in there really adds a lot to that little fairy image, and I just think that sentiment is so much fun. So this would work with any stamps that you have coordinating dies for. If you don't have coordinating dies, you can try to cut your own window by hand with a craft knife, but another option is to just die cut a circle or oval around it and create a shaker window that way. Okay, my next example uses the same stamp set, but this time I stepped it up a little bit by incorporating an embossing folder for the background. I again stamped my image and colored it. I have a piece of pool cardstock. Actually, this is Simon Says Stamp Sea Glass cardstock. It's cut to 4 inches by 5 1/4, and I die cut that image from the front of it. Underneath that, I will stamp my sentiment with black ink. You want to make sure to stamp your sentiment first before using an embossing folder. It's hard to stamp on the texture that an embossing folder gives. I'm using the Sunny Studio Sunburst embossing folder, and after that ink is completely dry, I'll put this into the folder, and then I'll run it through my die cut machine. For the Gemini Junior, I use a cutting plate, then the magnetic shim, then our embossing folder, and another cutting plate on top. Each die cut machine is different, but the instructions always say what sandwich you need to use for an embossing folder. Next, I have my craft foam, and I've already put the Stick-It double-sided adhesive on both sides. I'm holding my panel over it, and I'll use my pen to make marks at the edge of the die cut window. This will help me figure out where to position my die when I go to die cut the craft foam. So I see I'm very easily able to line up the die with those little pen marks. I'll temporarily tape that in place and run it through my machine. Remember that the shape piece that we don't use for our shaker card, we can save for another example. Now the glitter I'm putting in this is very fine, so I really want to make sure that I use my anti-static powder tool along the inside edge of the craft foam, just in case any of that adhesive is exposed. But I'll be honest, I really don't worry about it if some of the little shaker bits in the inside of the window stick to the edges. It helps to kind of spread things around within the window, but I know it bothers some people, so using the anti-static powder tool is very helpful. So I removed the release paper from the back of our craft foam and I positioned it over the stamped image. Now it's time to add some of our fun little goodies into the inside of this. This time I used the Lucy's Cards Fairy Dust. This has some larger circles and then some tiny little glitters in it, and it's perfect for a shaker card because it's iridescent, so it's got lots of sparkle. I then removed the release paper from the top of our craft foam, making sure that all those bits stayed on the inside. And then I quickly added a piece of acetate on top. That way everything is trapped inside of that little shaker window. And I think the iridescent look of this confetti is really fun with this little fairy bear. So I pressed the acetate onto that stick-it adhesive. And now it's time to add the front panel to this also. I put adhesive on the back of the panel and then lined it up with the craft foam opening. I added all of that to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. And then I also stamped on the matching envelope. You can see how the shaker pieces in there, add a little bit of interest to the image, but doesn't block the image. So you can still see through them and see that it's a cute little bear fairy under there. But that sparkle really adds interest to the simple card. I also think using an embossing folder for the panel on top adds something fun to it, especially this one that kind of draws you in towards the center of the card. Time for another example. Now this one shows that you can even use elaborate shaped stamped images and dies for this technique. The image I'm using is from this My Favorite Things Birth Yay stamp set and the coordinating dies. You can see all the adorable images in this one. I couldn't get over how cute that one on the right is, so I thought it'd be perfect for today's example. I stamped him and colored him and trimmed him down a bit, and now I want to add the word celebrate. Now this celebrate stamp was a longer sentiment, and I just cut the other words off so I could have celebrate by itself. I know cutting stamps is scary to some people, but I promise it's okay. I can still arrange the stamps how they were originally intended, but this gives me more use of my sentiments. I thought it was fun to put the sentiment on the stamped image itself so that we don't have to add it to the front of our card, just for a little bit of a change. So I went ahead off screen and I created my die cut craft foam panel and I added that around our stamped image, doing everything like I did earlier in this video. I'm also putting in some clear iridescent stars and circles. I like using clear for these because it doesn't block the stamped image. You can still see through them. Once I have those added, I'm putting my acetate piece on top. Now I will say when using a stamped image for a shaker window, it is best to put less in your shaker window. So less of your little gems or sequins or whatever, because you don't want to distract too much from your stamped image. Next, I have a piece of pattern paper. It's a light gray plaid that I went ahead and I cut and die cut to go right over this. I thought it'd be fun to use some pattern paper around the shaker window just for something different. I'm putting adhesive on the back and adding that to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. But I also added a little bit of a red matte to the back of our shaker window. When I put the gray onto the white note card, it just seemed a little lost. So by adding this tiny bit of red matte behind it, I'm able to make the card pop a bit more. So this shows that you can even use pattern papers or any kind of background that you create for that front die cut panel on your stamp shaker window. Also, you can see these cards come together pretty quickly. Once you have your stamped image ready to go, then really pulling the rest of the card together doesn't take up too much time. Okay, I'm really excited about this next example because this stamp set that I use was one that I saw at the big craft show, and it was my favorite stamp set of anything I saw. I think it's so clever and unique. This is the Avery Elle Phonomenal stamp set. I'm a big fan of faux, and I think these images are cute and the sentiments are so clever. Like the one that says, friends forever, have a super birthday, have a phenomenal day. Just a clever set to create some fun, happy cards with. So I went ahead and I have some craft foam here. This time I'm not using stick-it adhesive. I wanted to show you how to do this if you don't have that product. But I do have a piece of white craft foam, and I'm die cutting through it just like I did on the front white panel. So this time we're going to use a different adhesive. Because I'm putting in here bigger bits, I'm not putting tiny little glitter pieces, I'm putting bigger shaker elements, I'm just using liquid adhesive to glue my craft foam over my stamped image. I don't have to worry about anything kind of creeping under the craft foam, so it's okay if the adhesive isn't all the way to the edge of the craft foam. This time I'm using honeybee clay hearts. They make these in a bunch of different colors. I like the white and the light pink quite a bit. And I put a few of these in here. These are thicker than sequins or anything else. They're absolutely adorable. Now on top of this, I'm using some double-sided tape. I originally thought that the liquid adhesive wouldn't hold the acetate, but later I tried it and it does work. But here I'm using the double-sided tape to add the acetate piece over our shaker window. Now I have the front cardstock piece. This is the white cardstock that has the die cut. I'm using Gina K Amalgam Whisper ink. This is a super light gray ink, and I'm using that to stamp the little steam coming off the top, then using black ink to stamp our sentiment. So now all we have to do is glue this together. So I have some double-sided tape on the acetate here. Then I'm going to use liquid adhesive on the craft foam up there. Again, I'm mixing adhesives here, but later I do find out that you could stick with one. So I add the front panel, and then I have the little chopsticks. I colored them and cut them out by hand, and I'm adding them so they hang over the shaker window. So keep in mind, you don't have to keep the card simple and just have the shaker window. You can add other die cuts on the front of it and have the shaker window behind it. So here you can see how those little hearts add some fun to a pretty simple card. And also, because this image is big and I just used a few of those little embellishments inside, I don't cover up the image too much. So the key here is to make sure you just put a little bit of the shaker bits in the inside so that your image shows through. Okay, here is another example using a bigger image. This is a beautiful stamp set that I bought actually for Lila to use, but I just had to use it myself. It's the Ink on 3 Magical Unicorn stamp set. I thought this unicorn would be so much fun to color and then add some sparkly shakers on top. So I stamped and colored my image, and I also die cut with the coordinating die from some white craft foam, and I used Gina K Connect glue to adhere it. Now I'm taking some Pretty Pink Posh clear confetti. These are great because you can see through them, but they add a ton of sparkle and they're bigger, which I thought would be fun for this bigger image. So once I have some of those sequins onto the image, not too many, I'm using my Gina K Connect liquid adhesive to go around the image on the craft foam, and I'm laying my acetate on top of that. I was concerned that this wouldn't hold, but it held just fine. So that's a fast, inexpensive adhesive option when creating shaker windows. This card took surprisingly little time. Now I had already die cut my white panel for the front of my card and put double-sided tape on the back. I could have used the liquid adhesive again here, but I had already done it, so I just stuck with it and added that to the front of the card, and you can see I added a sentiment on the bottom of that. I glued that all into a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch gray note card. And this card, pretty simple, but you have the fun interest because of the little sequins that move around and add sparkle to our fun unicorn image. Okay, my next example shows how you can even use a stamped background around your shaker window, and also shows another option of goodies that you can put inside the window. For this one, I'm using the Mama Elephant Heart and Bloom stamp set. I really thought this image was beautiful and fun to color, and there are different sentiments that you can put along that banner, or you can use any sentiment you may already have. I stamped and colored the image and I white heat embossed a sentiment on it. And I did that off screen along with creating the die cut craft foam that will go around the shaker window. Now I did put stick-it adhesive on both sides of my craft foam before I die cut it, like I did in my early examples. But all of these different adhesive options would work. This time I'm putting clear gemstones inside of my shaker window. And I ended up really liking this option. This was one of my favorites. They don't get stuck in the little nooks and crannies of your die cut window. And you can see through them and they just catch the light beautifully. So you could even use gemstones or clear beads for the shaker goodies for these type of windows. So I'm putting my acetate on top, and then I have a panel created with the same die cut where I stamped the Altenew Dainty Swiss Dots background stamp. I just stamped it with Whisper ink from Gina K on Whisper cardstock from Gina K. And by using that little bit of stamping on the background, I add some interest to the card, but the focus still stays on that image inside of the shaker window. I really like how these gems catch the light. However, I know not everybody loves shaker cards. You could definitely do the same design and leave out the shaker goodies and basically just have this fun setback image with the shiny acetate on top. Okay, my next example is a pretty quick one to pull together, and I showed how to add a little bit of color around your shaker window. This time I'm using the Mama Elephant Flying with Friends stamp set. Such a cute set. I stamped the elephant and mouse with the balloon, and then I colored it and added the "You're the Best" sentiment to the balloon. So again, I'm incorporating the sentiment into our stamped image so I don't have to stamp it onto the background panel on the front of our card. Since I'm using tiny glitter pieces on this one, I covered my craft foam with stick-it adhesive on the front and the back before die cutting. So I position that over our stamped image and I'm trimming off the excess. Notice that my stick-it adhesive is smaller on this. It doesn't cover the whole craft sheet. That's just a way of me conserving my stick-it adhesive and only having it in the area where I did the die cutting. So now I'm adding some little clear circle sequins inside of the opening, carefully removing the top release paper and laying our acetate over it. Before I add my die cut white panel on the top, I decided to add a little bit of blue, like a haze of blue, around the opening. And I did this with my Altenew Sea Breeze blue ink, which is one of my favorites for skies, and my Picket Fence life-changing brushes. Brushes like this are a great way to add a light color to your background. I start with my brush in the opening and just work in circles around the opening. And you would be amazed how easy it is to create this soft look of color. And it really makes the shaker window stand out more because the rest of the front of the card is just plain white. Now I added that onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch light gray note card. And I also glued a few clear gemstones onto the front, just to kind of draw attention to the image and the shiny bits that are inside. Now there are a lot of small areas and small openings in the shaker window, so I was sure to use confetti in there that was small enough to move around freely. Okay, my last example for you today steps it up a bit. This time I have a stamped shaker window, but then I also added a die cut word shaker window, and surprisingly it's easy to do. I'm using the Sunny Studio Love Monkey stamp set. I stamped that little monkey on the top there with the heart-shaped balloons, and I colored them on white cardstock. For the front panel of my card, I decided to use craft cardstock, and I white heat embossed that Altenew Swiss Dots stamp set on it. So basically, I'm just creating my own pattern paper for the background. So I've taped my die into place, and I'll run it through my die cut machine, just like I've done with all of my other examples. But this time, I'm also going to do a die cut word that will go next to that opening. I'm using the Birch Press Sugar Script Hello die. This is one that I've used many, many times in videos. It's just a go-to die that seems to work with a variety style of cards. After die cutting that, I'm keeping the word hello in the die because the center of the E and the O we're going to need to add later. Off screen, I went ahead and covered both sides of my craft foam with the Stick-It double-sided adhesive. I just thought that option would be the easiest for this design. After tracing the monkey shape and the hello onto the craft foam, I'm lining up the monkey die and running that through my machine. I'm not die cutting the word hello. Instead, I'm going to cut a rectangle from the craft foam in the area where that hello die will be. The reason I'm doing this is if we would have used the Hello die to die cut from the craft foam, the little shaker bits wouldn't have enough room to get around those tiny areas in the word hello. So by having a larger opening behind it, the shaker bits can move around better. It works out really well. Now from the back of this, I'm removing the release paper, and then I will line up the stamped monkey image over on the right side, and then I'll just take a piece of white cardstock and put it behind that rectangle opening. I end up changing this later, but I wanted to show you that I originally started out by putting white cardstock behind that. Even a scrap piece of white cardstock works. Okay, so now I'm adding some little, these are like teeny tiny little clear beads. I'm not sure where I got them, but I added some to it. You can get tiny clear beads just about anywhere. I put those into the openings, remove the release paper from the top, and then I will add a piece of acetate that is big enough to cover all of this opening. Now, again, be sure to keep acetate that you don't need and use that for shaker windows. Any kind of thick acetate would work. So I'm pressing that down with my bone folder, and then I will put liquid adhesive, the Gina K liquid adhesive, on the back of our front panel. I thought liquid adhesive would be a good option here because I can get into the nooks and crannies of that hello word. Another option would have been to put double-sided adhesive on the back of this panel before we die cut it, but I didn't think about it at the time. Now at this point I need to add the center of the E and the O onto our acetate. So I put glue on the back of those little pieces. I line the die up with the opening, and then I take a craft pick and poke through the holes on the back of the die. This pushes the E center and the O center onto the acetate so that when I remove the die, they're perfectly positioned on that acetate piece. Now at this point, I thought, oh, that hello is kind of washed out. It doesn't stand out much. I think the white paper behind it gets lost with the white dots on the front of the card. So I changed gears. This is something I do often, but I usually edit it out to save time in videos. But I wanted to say it's okay to change gears as you go. So I carefully removed the white and added black cardstock, and I felt that stood out much better. Now I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back of this and adding it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. I really feel those clear gems are great inside of here, and it's fun that you can see them inside of the hello die cut also. So look through your stash and see what images you have with the coordinating dies that you could use for shaker windows, and also look at your other shapes like this hello die cut that you can create a shaker window from too. I used lots of supplies in this video. Sorry, I really wanted to use a lot of these sets, and this was a great opportunity. And I link them all to multiple sources below in my YouTube description. And also be sure to go to my blog. I always have so much more information there that might be helpful. I also linked to a couple other shaker window card videos here. They're a little more unique than the typical shaker card, so you might learn a thing or two if you want to watch those. As always, I appreciate the time you spend with me. We'll see you soon and have a wonderful weekend.